You are suing your ex-girlfriend to legally remove your name from her 4-month-old daughter, Jariah's birth certificate. No way you are her biological father. You claim that Mr. Alexander is Jariah's biological father, devastated that he would want to remove his name from her birth certificate. You state that his negligent behavior has caused you and your 2 children to become homeless, and you've asked the court to award you $1,500 for child care expenses.
One night we were in the bed chilling. I seen text messages and several phone calls from this guy named Dexter. She wouldn't answer the phone when I was in the room. I guess she would wait until maybe I left or whatever, so that's kind of a suspicion for me. Yeah, I asked her about it and she told me, like, don't worry about it, like, basically like it's none of my business. So
they say the truth can set you free, but in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the truth doesn't just set people free, it changes everything. When the DNA results hit the table, hearts either break or begin to heal. Because in this space, beneath the bright lights and the weight of justice, there's no room for lies, only the raw, human cost of discovering what's real. In a world where family, faith, and law collide, there's one stage that brings them together. The evidence stage in a divorce case, the emotional battlefield where truth and regret meet head-on. This is where people face the ultimate question. Who am I in the eyes of truth? And today, that truth is wrapped inside a DNA envelope, one that could either rebuild a family or tear it apart forever. Judge Lauren Lake sits at the center of this moral storm, embodying both compassion and command. She isn't just applying statutes or case law, she's navigating the fragile line between love and law. Each story in her courtroom reminds us that justice isn't just about verdicts. It's about people, pain, and perspective. It's about the relationship between law and justice itself, a bond often tested by emotion, memory, and regret. The case before her begins with a man's disbelief, a disbelief born from a failed lie detector test and a tangle of mistrust that turned love into suspicion. What started as affection ended in accusations, and the question of fatherhood became a courtroom headline. The man, consumed by doubt, sought relief not through therapy or forgiveness, but through legal separation from the truth he feared most. He wasn't alone. Many who sit in that witness chair come carrying the weight of what if. They've listened to the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where the ethics of advocacy meet real-life stakes. They've heard Truth Changes Everything podcast, where people confess how one test, one signature, or one revelation altered the course of their lives. They know that once a DNA test enters the story, there's no turning back. People regret taking it, yet they can't live without the clarity it brings. And that's where this story begins. A man named Alexander and a woman named Stuart. Their love story had once been ordinary. Moments of laughter, simple dates, shared dreams. But it slowly fractured under the pressure of jealousy, suspicion, and betrayal. Each argument left scars, and each silence deepened the gap between them. By the time they reached Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, their relationship had become a case study in the concept of justice in jurisprudence, how personal emotion influences the perception of fairness. Alexander wasn't seeking revenge, he was seeking confirmation. Stuart wasn't fighting for money, she was fighting for acknowledgement. He claimed there was no way he was the biological father of her 4-month-old daughter, Jariah. She claimed otherwise, saying his negligence and doubt had left her homeless and heartbroken. The legal claim might have been about $40, the cost to remove his name from the birth certificate. But what stood on trial was something far deeper. Trust, love, and the essence of fatherhood. Judge Lauren Lake, with her steady voice and unmatched empathy, guided them through the storm. This wasn't just about a document. It was about the moral evidence that life brings when law meets emotion. She reminded them that while DNA may prove biology, it cannot define compassion. Still, the courtroom runs on evidence, not emotion. And the evidence here began with suspicion. Late-night texts, missed calls, a man named Dexter appearing at the center of their story like an unwelcome ghost. Alexander saw messages that fueled his doubt, while Stewart countered that her actions were reactions, attempts to mirror his own unfaithfulness, to make him feel the sting she had endured. This exchange turned their love into a psychological chess game, each move a mix of revenge and regret. Their testimonies reflected the human struggle between pride and vulnerability. When Stewart admitted she had faked messages to make him jealous, the room fell silent. In that moment, the adverse inference in the Evidence Act wasn't just a legal principle. It was alive before everyone's eyes. Actions have consequences, and withholding truth can alter how justice is delivered. Judge Lake saw through the layers. "Do you understand how the tit-for-tat has come back to haunt you?" she asked. That question wasn't just for them. It was for everyone who's ever mistaken payback for peace. As the episode unfolded, it became clear this wasn't just about paternity, it was about accountability. Alexander's doubts had grown into bitterness. Stewart's defenses had hardened into despair. Their story echoed the struggles discussed in the Divorce Course podcast, where experts dissect how small lies can grow into full-blown emotional divorces long before the legal paperwork begins. Every word in that courtroom carried the weight of lost time and misplaced trust. When Stewart's tears finally fell, they weren't only for herself. They were for a baby who had become a symbol of uncertainty. Her daughter, Jariah, hadn't chosen this battle, yet her identity now depended on science, evidence, and a strand of DNA. The irony was almost poetic. A man seeking to remove his name from a child's birth certificate might soon discover that the truth he ran from was the very thing that connected him to that child forever. Judge Lake reminded them of something profound. Justice is not punishment, it's alignment with truth. And sometimes, the courtroom becomes a place of celebrate recovery testimonies, not just rulings. It's where people confront their guilt, face their pain, and rebuild from it. The evidence unfolded like a slow confession. Alexander's sister testified, adding more confusion to the story, claiming infidelity, recalling nights of unanswered calls. But even she seemed torn between loyalty and fairness. The case wasn't just about who lied. It was about who would take responsibility once the truth came out. And through it all, Judge Lauren Lake listened. Not just to their words, but to their silences. Every pause told a story of what they couldn't admit. The court became more than a stage for evidence. It became a mirror reflecting how fragile human trust can be. In her firm yet compassionate tone, Judge Lake embodied what every Supreme Court ruling aims to achieve: balance between reason and empathy. Her decisions weren't driven by emotion alone. They were guided by the belief that justice must heal, not harm. The story of Alexander and Stewart mirrors thousands of others. DNA test cheating stories that begin in doubt and end in revelation. Some find closure, others find chaos, but in every case, the truth stands undefeated. When Judge Lake finally ordered the DNA results to be read, you could almost feel the heartbeat of everyone in the room. It wasn't just a test result, it was the end of fear and the beginning of accountability. The letter from the lab, DNA Diagnostics, carried the kind of authority that no argument could outweigh. It was science, unbending and emotionless, yet capable of shaping destinies. As the results were read aloud, time seemed to freeze. The verdict, "Mr. Alexander, you are the father." The reaction was electric. Gasps, tears, disbelief. The man who had built walls of doubt was suddenly stripped of them. His face told a story of instant humility, how truth, once feared, can become a doorway to redemption. Judge Lake's words followed with grace and gravity. She reminded him that while the DNA confirmed biology, fatherhood demanded something deeper: presence, compassion, responsibility. The $40 he came to claim no longer mattered. What mattered now was rebuilding trust, restoring dignity, and understanding the lesson hidden inside the chaos. Because in every adoption story or custody battle, in every child support dispute or evidence hearing, there lies the same heartbeat of humanity, the hope that truth, however painful, will lead to peace. When Judge Lauren Lake looks across the courtroom, she doesn't just see cases, she sees people caught between law and love, tangled in the fragile relationship between justice and emotion. Every episode becomes a living Celebrate Recovery testimony. People standing before the truth, raw and trembling, desperate to rebuild what deception destroyed. After Alexander's revelation, the tension in the room turned into reflection. It wasn't victory, it was awakening. This was never just a fight over money or pride. It was about how easily humans confuse pain with evidence and fear with fact. His regret hung in the air like a quiet confession. You could see in his eyes what people regret taking, not just DNA tests, but chances, trust, and love itself. In that courtroom, truth changes everything. It's not a slogan, it's the law of life. And Judge Lake, who has spent years balancing empathy with enforcement, knows that the moment truth enters the room, everything false begins to fall apart. As Alexander promised to step up and take responsibility for his daughter, the room softened. Even Stuart's tears shifted from sorrow to relief. Judge Lake didn't just deliver a verdict. She restored the foundation of parenthood. She turned the evidence stage in a divorce case into a stage for redemption. Because sometimes, justice isn't about winning. It's about owning the truth. Her closing words in that case echoed through the courtroom. It's not just about the test, it's about who you choose to be after the truth is known. That was the heart of it. The concept of justice in jurisprudence simplified to human emotion. The law defines responsibility, truth defines character, but the day didn't end there. Another story was waiting. One that would test not just love, but loyalty. Another family, another tangled web of betrayal, this time rooted in lies, lust, and the desperate search for validation. A man named Moody walked in next, older and worn, carrying the exhaustion of years spent doubting. His case mirrored the haunting patterns of Alexander's, DNA test cheating stories that circle the same themes. Trust broken, forgiveness forgotten, truth delayed. But this time there was a twist. A failed lie detector test had set everything on fire. Moody accused his partner, Vaughn, of being unfaithful. Not once, but repeatedly. 6 years of love, laughter, and layered deception had led them here, under the steady eyes of Judge Lauren Lake. He believed that the child he had raised, a boy named Kadir, might not be his biological son. Vaughn admitted to mistakes, yes, but claimed growth. She said she was no longer that woman, that she had changed. But as the judge listened, she knew that the past, like evidence, never disappears. It lingers until truth calls it forward. The courtroom became a living lesson in adverse inference in evidence law. When silence or deception is present, the absence of honesty becomes its own form of evidence. When the lie detector results came to light, the atmosphere shifted completely. Vaughn had failed not one but multiple questions. Questions about fidelity, honesty, and loyalty. For many, that failure would have been enough to end the relationship forever. For Moody, it became the final push toward the one place truth could no longer hide, the DNA lab. Judge Lake watched him closely, her expression blending firmness and empathy. This was no stranger to her. She's seen countless men and women use the Evidence Act as both a shield and a sword, clinging to proof when love no longer felt safe. In this courtroom, the relationship between law and justice becomes visible in every sigh, every tear, every whispered plea. Law is cold, justice is human. Law demands evidence, justice demands understanding. Judge Lauren Lake walks that line every single day, reminding both parties that the law can decide parenthood, but only the heart can sustain it. As Moody and Vaughn revisited the years of betrayal, something profound unfolded, a conversation not about science, but about humanity. Vaughn's confession was painful yet real. She admitted her lies, her immaturity, her manipulations, and in doing so, she unknowingly became a testimony of recovery. A reminder that redemption doesn't come from erasing mistakes, but from acknowledging them. Her words echoed the lessons often shared in the Divorce Course podcast, that healing after betrayal isn't about proving the other person wrong, but finding who you've become after everything fell apart. Judge Lake's courtroom has always mirrored the Supreme Court in miniature, a place where every human flaw meets its legal counterpoint. She listens with the precision of a judge and the heart of a mother. Her sentences don't just cite law, they restore dignity. As she examined Vaughn's failed lie detector results, she didn't rush to condemn. Instead, she looked deeper, into intent, remorse, and growth. That's where real justice lives. You failed the test, she said softly, but you don't have to fail your family. That single line summed up her entire philosophy. Justice not as a punishment, but as a pathway to change. Still, Moody's pain was undeniable. The Truth Changes Everything podcast could have featured his story. A man who demanded truth but feared it at the same time. He said if the DNA proved the child wasn't his, he'd leave for good. His words weren't cruel. They were tired. 6 years of doubt had hollowed out the hope inside him. Judge Lake watched as Vaughn, tearful and trembling, explained how shame had turned her into a liar. I thought I could beat the system, she confessed, a phrase that hung heavy in the air. It wasn't just about the lie detector anymore. It was about the illusion that people can outsmart truth. The irony was clear. Every time someone tries to manipulate the facts, they end up creating more evidence against themselves. That's what adverse inference in the Evidence Act teaches, that silence, lies, and half-truths speak louder than words. But as the DNA envelope appeared once again, that thin paper seal between suspicion and salvation, the courtroom felt united by one heartbeat. Fear, because in the realm of DNA test cheating stories, no one truly wins. They only survive the truth. Judge Lake opened the results with her trademark composure. Her voice, calm but charged with emotion, read the verdict. When it comes to 3-year-old Kadir Moody, it has been determined by this court. A pause long enough to hold a lifetime. Mr. Moody, you are the father. Silence. Then tears. Then applause. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. It was the moment when truth stopped being the enemy and became the bridge back to trust. Moody, who had entered the courtroom skeptical and scarred, broke into quiet tears. For the first time in years, he looked at Vaughn not as a suspect, but as the mother of his child. Truth, once feared, had become their only hope. Judge Lauren Lake didn't celebrate loudly. She simply nodded, understanding that healing begins where certainty replaces chaos. Her court may not be the Supreme Court, but in that moment, it carried the same gravity, the same moral weight that law professors describe when teaching the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Every paternity case she oversees, every child support judgment she delivers, and every tear she witnesses builds on one timeless truth. Justice must serve both the law and the heart. When the courtroom emptied, the message lingered. The truth doesn't ruin lives. Lies do. DNA doesn't destroy families. Deception does. And sometimes, the only way forward is through the painful honesty that sets everything straight. This is what makes Judge Lauren Lake's court so different. It's not just about cases. It's about consequences. It's not about who wins. It's about who learns. Her bench becomes a classroom of humanity, a place where law students could study the relationship between law and justice in its purest form. No textbooks, no theory, just real people facing real consequences. From Alexander's doubt to Moody's regret, from Stewart's deception to Vaughn's confession, every episode becomes a living journal entry in the ever-growing chronicle of truth and grace. If you listen closely, it's not just about fatherhood or fidelity. It's about identity, about how we define ourselves when the lies fall away, about how truth, even when painful, gives us back our name, our dignity, and our peace. The DNA test may be the centerpiece of the show, but its meaning goes far beyond science. It's a metaphor for clarity, accountability, and the undeniable pull of justice. That's why Judge Lake's voice, steady and sure, carries the weight of both courtroom and confession booth. She reminds everyone that healing begins the moment truth is spoken out loud. Because in her court, truth is not an ending. It's a beginning. The courtroom had emptied after the verdict, but the silence it left behind carried echoes of reflection. Every face that passed through Judge Lauren Lake's bench, from the defensive to the broken, told a story bigger than the case file. These were not just episodes. They were lessons in what it means to seek justice and mercy at the same time. The episode had ended, but the story of truth, regret, and recovery continued. Far beyond that wooden gavel, in every family touched by mistrust, every home where doubt lingers, and every child caught between love and law, the same question remains. What do we do with the truth once it arrives? That is the heartbeat of Judge Lake's courtroom. It's not merely about the evidence stage in a divorce case, or the legal weight of the adverse inference in the Evidence Act. It's about people who thought they could hide behind lies, until the truth arrived with the precision of science and the mercy of justice. From Alexander's case to Moody's confession, the pattern was clear. Both men demanded DNA tests thinking they would find distance, but what they found instead was connection. Not just to the children in question, but to their own conscience. And both women, who entered the courtroom fragile and defensive, left with a strange peace that only truth can bring. It's here where law meets soul, the rare intersection that Judge Lauren Lake understands so well. Her bench isn't a battlefield, it's a bridge between the game-changing attorney podcast mindset, where professionals discuss strategy, persuasion, and evidence, and the real, raw world where human beings must live with the outcomes of those legal principles. Because beneath every argument about child support or paternity, there's something far deeper happening. People are learning what it truly means to be accountable. In that courtroom, truth has a way of peeling back layers. Behind the anger, the jealousy, the denials, there's always fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear that once the truth comes out, love won't survive it. And yet, again and again, truth changes everything. People who came to the courtroom as enemies often leave as something else, not necessarily friends, but humans who understand each other in a new light. Judge Lake doesn't just deliver rulings. She restores perspective. She reminds parents that their children deserve certainty, not confusion. That DNA is not the enemy. Deception is. Each episode of Paternity Court becomes a kind of moral documentary, a celebrate recovery testimony in real time. You can see the cycle unfold. Accusation, defense, exposure, and then the quiet surrender when truth finally enters the room. It's the same emotional rhythm heard on the Divorce Course podcast or Truth Changes Everything podcast. Voices of people trying to understand why truth hurts so much, and yet heals even more. That's the paradox of justice. It stings before it saves. In one of Judge Lake's reflections during a similar case, she once said, "Evidence can prove a point, but only accountability can change a life." Those words could define the entire philosophy of modern jurisprudence. The concept of justice in jurisprudence that law, schools teach but few courtrooms embody. For Judge Lake, justice isn't just about reading DNA results. It's about reading people. She reads their tones, their body language, their silences. She recognizes when anger is just heartbreak in disguise, and when pride is simply pain refusing to be named. Alexander's regret over doubting his daughter wasn't unique. It was universal. Millions of people, whether on screen or in real life, have watched their relationships crumble because of suspicion. And once doubt enters love, it behaves like acid, dissolving everything tender until all that's left is defense. That's why the DNA test becomes such a powerful metaphor. It's not just science, it's confession. It's the undeniable moment when human stories intersect with truth that cannot be argued away. People often say they regret taking the test, but in truth, what they regret is not the result. It's what the result exposes. In Alexander's case, it exposed his fear of being betrayed. In Stuart's case, it revealed her guilt over manipulating love to provoke jealousy. In Moody's story, it unveiled his exhaustion with lies, and in Vaughan's, it showed how shame can turn people into prisoners of their own secrets. Yet, in all these stories, there was one constant: Judge Lauren Lake's unshakable belief that everyone deserves a second chance, but no one deserves to stay in denial. As the credits rolled on those double episodes, the viewers were left with more than just drama. They were left with insight. The kind of insight you hear, discussed on the Game Changing Attorney podcast when experts explore how courtroom decisions shape lives far beyond the law. Books. This wasn't just courtroom entertainment. It was philosophy in motion, real-world applications of justice, accountability, and empathy. The Supreme Court often deals with abstract constitutional questions, but Judge Lake's courtroom deals with the constitution of the human heart. Each ruling is a miniature moral trial, where love, law, and logic compete for dominance. And if there's one thing these cases prove, it's this: the truth, no matter how late it arrives, always wins. Beyond the individual stories, Judge Lake's courtroom also mirrors society itself, a microcosm of how we deal with truth on a larger scale. We often delay it